12 Israeli military vehicles entered the village of Saida al-Golan in the Quneirita countryside of southern Syria on the morning of January 6, 2026, marking one of the most significant ground movements in the region in weeks, according to multiple news agencies, including Al Jazeera on the ground and state media reporting from Damascus. This incursion took place amid sensitive US-mediated security negotiations in Paris between Syrian and Israeli representatives. The movement of the vehicles was widely characterized by Syrian officials as a fresh violation of Syrian sovereignty, occurring at a moment when diplomats were attempting to bridge deeply entrenched differences. The vehicles entered from the Tal Abu Gaithar crossing point and moved along the rural road network through Ruzania before reaching Saida al-Golan, where they established a temporary checkpoint and briefly searched a structure before withdrawing back toward the Israeli-controlled side of the border. Local media activists reported that this occurred concurrently with other small patrols moving into nearby villages like Berika and Quneirita, indicating a broader pattern of near-daily incursions rather than an isolated movement of forces. Syrian state news agency SANA described the presence of Israeli military patrols in Quneirita as an extension of what it calls an occupation and a sustained campaign of violations of Syrian territorial integrity. Syrian officials reiterated that such incursions have been occurring for months, with checkpoints established, land bulldozed, arrests made, and heavy equipment used to extend control deeper into Syrian frontier areas since the overthrow of former President Bashar al-Assad in late 2024. These actions, state media argues, undermine the ongoing negotiations in Paris and demonstrate a disconnect between diplomatic language and on-the-ground military action. Behind these movements lies a complex historical and political backdrop that stretches back decades. The Golan Heights, a strategic plateau overlooking northern Israel and southern Syria, has been a flashpoint since the Arab-Israeli wars of the 1960s and 1970s. The 1974 disengagement agreement, negotiated after the 1973 war, set out a unmonitored buffer zone between Israeli and Syrian forces. For decades, this pact served as a relatively stable, though uneasy basis for preventing large-scale conflict along the ceasefire line. In recent years, however, that framework has unraveled. Both sides accuse the other of violating previous understandings. Damascus insists that Israel's deeper incursions into Syrian territory constitute a breach, while Israel contends that changes in Syrian governance and security threats negate the original framework. The Paris talks resumed in early January 2026 after several months of stalled diplomacy, are intended to address precisely these issues. Syrian Foreign Minister Assad al-Shabani and Intelligence Chief Hussein al-Salama traveled to Paris under US coordination and French mediation to seek a security agreement with Israeli representatives. that would revive or replace the 1974 disengagement framework. According to Reuters, the primary Syrian demand has been the restoration of borders to their positions before the December 2024 fall of Assad's regime and the withdrawal of Israeli forces from areas they have since occupied. This stance reflects Damascus' view that sovereignty and territorial integrity are non-negotiable prerequisites for peace. From the Israeli perspective, as conveyed through diplomatic reporting and regional analysis, security concerns dominate. Officials in Jerusalem have framed their actions as necessary responses to perceived threats from armed groups operating within Syria's decentralized and war-torn landscape. Some Israeli leaders have publicly cited protection for minority populations near the border, including the Druze community, as justification for proactive operations. In late 2025, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu emphasized Israel's interest in ensuring a peaceful border, although his government has also been clear that any agreement must include strong security guarantees preventing future attacks or Iranian entrenchment near its borders. The dynamics on the ground in southern Syria have been particularly volatile. The countryside of Quneirita, adjacent to the Israeli-held portion of the Golan Heights, has seen a pattern of near-daily incursions by Israeli forces throughout late 2025 and early 2026. These include not just the convoy of 12 vehicles on January 6, but also smaller patrols and checkpoints that move into villages, conduct house searches, and occasionally detain residents. Local activists and Syrian state media have documented these incursions as symptomatic of a broader strategy to exert control over strategic terrain south of the ceasefire line. These operations exacerbate tensions among local civilian populations, many of whom report feelings of insecurity and disruption to daily life. Farmers describe checkpoints that impede their access to fields, while others recount detainments and the psychological strain of regular military presence. There is a pervasive sense among villagers that their communities have become staging grounds for geopolitical maneuvering, with little regard for local welfare. Such sentiments are echoed in broader Syrian discourse, where public anger over foreign military activities has mounted. Diplomatically, the juxtaposition of military movements and high-level talks illustrates the fragility of the negotiation process. Syrian sources insist that their delegation in Paris remains committed to dialogue, framing the negotiations as part of a long-term push to reclaim what they call inalienable national rights. They stress that diplomacy must be coupled with tangible reductions in military pressure. On the other hand, Israeli counterparts have characterized the talks as technical. Discussions focused on security arrangements that would formalize certain realities on the ground, including demilitarization measures in sensitive zones. A report from Axios reflects that U.S. proposals might include a demilitarized economic zone along the border, designed to build confidence and reduce friction. The U.S. role in these negotiations cannot be understated. Washington has positioned itself as both mediator and strategic stakeholder. keen to curb Iranian influence in the region, stabilize volatile frontiers, and support its key ally Israel, while also engaging with a post-Assad Syrian leadership that is nevertheless fragmented and contested. The complexity of this task is evident in the different priorities each side brings to the table. Syria's insistence on withdrawal and sovereignty, Israel's focus on security guarantees, and the U.S. prioritization of containment and preventing escalation. France's involvement as co-mediator reflects Paris' broader interest in Middle Eastern stability and its historic diplomatic footprint in the region. French officials have repeatedly called for respect for international law and for steps that would de-escalate conflict, including calls for Israeli forces to withdraw from occupied territories and comply with internationally recognized agreements. Such advocacy resonates with Syria's broader calls for sovereignty, even as Western powers balance geopolitical calculations and their alliances. The legacy of conflict in the region casts a long shadow over these events. The Quneirita Governorate, in particular, has been a recurrent site of military competition, dating back to earlier confrontations between Syrian forces and the Israel Defense Forces (IDF). Strategic hills and vantage points such as Siar's Al-Nafel and Tal al-Shah have been militarily significant, overseeing key border terrain and often becoming flashpoints in times of tension. While current reports focus on recent incursions, understanding these geographical factors illuminates why control of the countryside carries such importance for all parties involved. Relations between Syria and Israel have fluctuated over decades, with intermittent periods of direct confrontation and tenuous ceasefires. The hardening of positions since the Syrian civil war and the later collapse of central authority in Damascus created an opening for Israeli operations beyond previously recognized lines, scuppering earlier diplomatic frameworks and leading to a recalibration of military and political strategies on both sides. The January 6th incursion by 12 military vehicles, though brief, became emblematic of deeper underlying issues. Distrust between negotiating parties, competing visions for border security, and the challenge of reconciling diplomatic engagement with ongoing military realities. For Syrian negotiators, the timing of the movement during active talks in Paris symbolized a fundamental contradiction that must be resolved if any durable agreement is to be achieved. For the Israeli side, such operations are framed internally as necessary precautions in an unpredictable security environment, even as they complicate diplomatic optics. As the talks in Paris continued into their second day, negotiators faced the difficult task of bridging extensive gaps. Syrian demands emphasized Israeli withdrawal to positions held before late 2024 and respect for full sovereignty, including the reversal of actions in Quneitra and other occupied areas. Israeli representatives, backed politically by Washington and security assessments that stress the unpredictability of Syrian territory post-Assad, pressed for formalized security guarantees, including demilitarized zones and mechanisms to prevent hostile actions emanating from Syrian soil. The broader regional context also plays into these dynamics. Neighboring states observe the negotiations and military movements with acute interest, as changes in Syria's status could have ripple effects across borders. Turkey, for instance, has emphasized respect for territorial integrity and international law, while Gulf states watch for shifts that might affect security and geopolitical alignments. Meanwhile, Iran, Hezbollah, and other non-state actors remain influential in the overall strategic calculations, even if not directly party to the Paris talks. In conclusion, the entry of 12 Israeli vehicles into southern Syria on January 6, 2026, was more than a tactical maneuver. It was a reflection of the broader struggle between diplomacy and strategy in a region that has long been characterized by overlapping conflicts. The incident highlighted the challenges of negotiating security arrangements amidst ongoing military operations. The deep historical grievances rooted in territorial disputes, and the immense difficulty of crafting a peace that satisfies the conflicting imperatives of sovereignty, security, and regional stability. As talks in Paris continued, the outcome remained uncertain, shaped by these complex, interlocking factors that extend far beyond a single convoy of vehicles into the Syrian countryside.